Welcome to our study on Moses, God's faithfulness in the wilderness. Moses may be a character that's very familiar to you, or it may be something completely new that you're discovering. But wherever you're at in your faith journey, I hope you feel welcome to dive into Scripture and to spend time with learning about who God is through the life of Moses. As we go throughout this study, you're going to have 4 days of homework for each week. And each week it's going to have some line journaling pages at the end for you to jot down any notes or any prayer requests that you have or prayer requests of others that you're praying for. At the end of each day, there's going to be a pause and reflect section for you to really think about what God is speaking to you in your heart right now. And I don't want you to just keep those things to yourself. I want you to think about how you can be sharing what God is doing in your life. Something I find so interesting as we study Moses is what God was intentionally doing in the life of his people during their time in the wilderness. He was writing an amazing testimony that was going to be passed down for generations and one that we can still draw truths from today. He was doing things that only God could do, that the people would look back and remember how he showed up and how he was always faithful and what he did in the wilderness to take care of his people. He's still the same God today. The God that we read about in the Old Testament, the God that parted the Red Sea, the God that fed his people in the wilderness, he's still our God. I'm going to read a few scriptures to you out of the book of Deuteronomy. So Deuteronomy is kind of like this big speech that Moses gives to the people before they enter the Promised Land. It's after they've already gone through the wilderness for 40 years, and it's what he wants them to remember before they go in. So this is Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 9. It says, "Know therefore that the Lord your God is God. He is the faithful God, keeping his covenant of love to 1,000 generations of those who love him and keep his commandments." Moses is reminding them that God is faithful. It is just his character of who he is. It doesn't matter what circumstances we face, the faithfulness of God does not change. He goes on in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 2 through 4, to remind the people of a few things. He says, "Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years, to humble and test you in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands. He humbled you, causing you to hunger, and then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your ancestors had known, to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Your clothes did not wear out, and your feet did not swell during these 40 years. God took care of his people, and he still takes care of his people today. As you go throughout this study, you're going to notice that some of the questions are super easy. That's intentional. I want you to read a passage, but then I also want you to remember what you read. So sometimes jotting down those facts that are easy to find is helpful. It's always nice in a study whenever you know what the answer is. I know I always like that in school. I'm also going to ask you some personal questions, some questions that help you apply what you're learning. And you're going to notice a thread throughout this entire study. I'm trying to get you to think of how God is showing up in your life now and what he's already done in your life. And I want you to take that testimony and share it with others. I don't know where you're at right now. You might be walking through a wilderness season and wondering what God is doing. You might have just gone through a hard season and maybe you feel like you've entered the promised land for a time. But wherever you're at, remember what God has done. You know, as people would go through this wilderness season of wondering and of waiting, sometimes they would look to, what word is God trying to teach me through this wilderness? So if you're in that kind of season, think about what God might be writing on your heart right now that he wants to take with you out of the wilderness. I know for myself right now, I'm in a wilderness season. My husband was recently laid off again, and we're walking through the unknown of what his next job is going to be and when God is going to show up. But what I do know is that my God is faithful, that he is the same God that parted the Red Sea, that he is the same God that fed his people manna, and that he is still the same God that will provide and take care of me. But I'll be honest, waiting is not easy. So as you journey through this story, think about your own story. What is God writing on you, and how can you share it?